For 6 months, a 9-year-old girl gave away her only meal. No one asked her to. No one praised her for it. She simply stepped toward a chain-link fence each afternoon and passed half of her lunch to a boy who pretended he wasn't hungry. 22 years later, that same boy was worth $47 million, celebrated in business magazines, applauded in boardrooms, photographed beside politicians and athletes. Yet for 5 years, he had quietly funded a search across 3 states, trying to find the girl who once fed him in silence. When he finally came face to face with her again, the truth he uncovered forced him to confront everything he believed about success, loyalty, and debt. The question was never why he searched. The question was why she disappeared without a trace. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In the late 1990s, in a factory town outside Dayton, Ohio, 2 neighborhoods sat divided by a rusted chain-link fence that ran behind an elementary school playground. On one side were modest brick homes with trimmed lawns and pickup trucks parked neatly in driveways. On the other were duplexes with peeling paint, broken porch lights, and windows covered in blankets instead of curtains. This was not unusual for the Midwest at the time. Manufacturing jobs had declined sharply throughout the decade, and communities built around assembly lines were adjusting to layoffs that seemed to arrive without warning. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the late 1990s saw thousands of manufacturing positions disappear across Ohio alone, leaving families to reassemble their lives with part-time work, temporary contracts, or long commutes. It was in this divided town that 9-year-old Emily Carter carried her lunchbox each morning, unaware that a simple decision would echo across decades. Emily lived with her parents and younger brother in a small 2-bedroom house her father had purchased when the local parts plant was thriving. Her father, Daniel Carter, had worked third shift for 15 years before the layoffs began trimming entire departments. Her mother, Lisa, worked mornings at a dental office and spent evenings helping neighbors with bookkeeping to supplement the family's shrinking income. Dinner conversations in the Carter home were practical and steady. There was talk of budgets, overtime, church on Sundays, and the importance of keeping promises. Emily absorbed those lessons quietly. Teachers described her as observant, responsible, unusually thoughtful for her age. She did not speak loudly in class, but she noticed everything. She noticed when a classmate forgot a pencil. She noticed when someone avoided eye contact during group reading. And she noticed the boy who stood near the far corner of the playground each afternoon pretending to be busy. His name was Michael Reynolds. He had moved into one of the duplexes beyond the fence after his mother relocated from Kentucky following a divorce that left her with limited savings and no steady employment. Public records from Montgomery County show that during the late 1990s, rental turnover in that district increased significantly as families moved in search of lower housing costs. Michael's mother, Angela Reynolds, found sporadic work as a home health aide, but shifts were inconsistent. School counselors would later note that Michael frequently declined cafeteria meals even though he qualified for assistance. Pride can take many forms in a child. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like pretending you are not hungry. Emily first saw him watching other children unwrap sandwiches while he kept his backpack zipped. She did not ask questions. The next day, she brought an extra apple. For 132 school days, according to the school calendar from that academic year, Emily divided her lunch into 2 equal portions: peanut butter sandwiches, carrot sticks, occasionally a small bag of pretzels. She timed it carefully, walking toward the fence when teachers were supervising the opposite side of the yard. There was no dramatic exchange, no whispered confessions. At first, Michael shook his head. The second day, he accepted the apple but avoided her eyes. By the 3rd week, they had established a routine built entirely on nods. In interviews years later, classmates would say they barely remembered seeing them together. That was the point. Emily did not want recognition. She did not want her parents worrying about whether there would be enough food at home. She acted with the quiet certainty that if someone is hungry and you have food, you share it. Then, one Thursday in early spring, Michael did not appear at the fence. Emily waited until the bell rang. She waited the next day as well. By Monday, his desk inside the classroom was empty. The teacher informed students that Michael had transferred schools due to a family relocation. There were no details beyond that. In the late 1990s, student transfers were common in districts facing economic shifts. Families moved for cheaper rent, new job opportunities, or to live with relatives. Emily went home that afternoon and removed the small red ribbon she had worn in her hair for months. The following morning, before school, she tied half of it around her wrist and placed the other half inside her desk drawer. It was a private gesture, a way to mark the absence of someone who had never asked for help but had accepted it. Michael left Ohio with little more than a duffel bag and a promise he barely understood himself. On the final afternoon before the move, he had found Emily near the fence and told her, in the awkward certainty of a 9-year-old boy, that one day he would come back and repay her. Children make declarations without measuring time. They speak in absolutes because they have not yet learned how complicated distance can become. Angela Reynolds relocated to Nashville, Tennessee, where census data from the early 2000s shows rapid population growth driven by service and healthcare industries. Michael attended 3 different middle schools over 5 years. Teachers described him as determined, often staying after class to ask about business articles he had found in newspapers. Hunger had left an impression deeper than embarrassment. It had given him a reference point. By the time he reached high school, Michael had developed an interest in software development after reading about the dot-com expansion that reshaped American business in the early 2000s. According to reports from the Pew Research Center, internet usage in the United States grew dramatically during that period, creating opportunities for entrepreneurs willing to take risks. Michael worked part-time at an electronics store, saved money for a second-hand computer, and began teaching himself programming through library books and early online forums. He graduated near the top of his class and earned a partial scholarship to a state university in Tennessee, where he majored in information systems. Former classmates would later recall that he rarely discussed his childhood, but he kept a small object inside a notebook in his dorm room, a faded strip of red ribbon. After college, Michael co-founded a logistics software company designed to help regional shipping firms optimize delivery routes. The early years were uncertain. According to U.S. Small Business Administration statistics, roughly half of new businesses closed within 5 years. Michael and his partner slept in the office during product launches and pitched investors who declined them repeatedly. Yet by 2012, their platform had secured contracts with several mid-sized freight companies seeking cost-saving automation. Revenue increased steadily. In 2016, a larger technology firm acquired a controlling stake in the company for an amount industry analysts estimated in the tens of millions. Financial magazines featured Michael as a disciplined founder who rose from modest beginnings to executive leadership. Photographs showed him in tailored suits, speaking at conferences about resilience and strategic thinking. What those articles did not mention was the question he asked himself each birthday: where is she now? 5 years before the reunion that would alter his life, Michael hired a licensed private investigator based in Ohio to trace Emily Carter's whereabouts. Public records searches revealed that Daniel Carter's factory position had been eliminated in the early 2000s. Foreclosure filings indicated the Carter home had been sold under financial strain. Voter registration data showed the family relocated twice within a 5-year period. Then, abruptly, Emily Carter's name ceased appearing in standard databases after she turned 18. No marriage license under her birth name. No property ownership. No professional licensing. The investigator expanded the search to surrounding states, reviewing school yearbooks, local newspaper archives, and church bulletins. Census mobility reports confirm that between 2000 and 2010, millions of Americans moved across state lines for employment, making long-term tracking complex. Still, something about the Carter family's sudden absence stood out. When the investigator finally uncovered a lead, It came from a small-town voter registration under the name Emily Lawson in western Pennsylvania. Cross-referencing birth dates and partial Social Security records suggested a match. Further inquiry revealed that Daniel Carter had faced legal trouble related to a failed investment scheme that promised returns during the housing boom of the mid-2000s. Court documents, publicly accessible through county records, indicated charges of financial misconduct. While the case did not attract national headlines, it placed strain on the family and may have influenced their decision to relocate under modified names. Emily, now in her early 30s, worked as a cafeteria manager at a public elementary school participating in the National School Lunch Program, a federally assisted initiative that provides free or reduced-price meals to millions of children across the United States each year. Michael traveled to Pennsylvania without notifying media or colleagues. He entered the school office under the pretense of discussing a potential donation. When Emily stepped into the hallway, he recognized her immediately despite the years. Time changes posture, voice, hairstyle. It does not erase the memory of someone who altered your childhood. She looked at him with polite confusion until he placed a small glass case on the table between them. Inside lay the faded half of a red ribbon. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she exhaled in a way that suggested she had carried that memory carefully, though quietly. From a drawer in her office, she removed the other half, preserved in a folded envelope. She had kept it through relocations, through her father's legal battles, through years of working double shifts to help her family recover stability. Emily explained that after her father's conviction, the family chose distance over explanation. Changing their last name allowed them to rebuild without constant reference to past headlines. She had postponed college to support her younger brother and later returned part-time to complete a degree in nutrition and food services. Her decision to work in school cafeterias was deliberate. Federal reports from the U.S. Department of Agriculture indicate that for many children, school meals represent a primary source of daily nutrition. Emily wanted to ensure no child stood near a fence pretending to be full. Michael listened as she described organizing weekend food backpack programs for students whose families struggled between paychecks. She had built something meaningful without press releases or venture capital. He realized that while he had measured success in valuations and acquisitions, she had measured it in quiet continuity. When he offered to fund a scholarship in her name or invest in expanding her nutrition programs, she thanked him but declined personal recognition. She agreed, however, to collaborate on a foundation focused on child hunger in underfunded districts. According to Feeding America, more than 34 million people in the United States, including millions of children, face food insecurity each year. Michael committed a significant portion of his post-acquisition wealth to establishing regional partnerships supporting meal distribution and after-school nutrition initiatives. Yet the most significant shift was internal. The search that began as a personal promise became an acknowledgement that kindness carries weight beyond repayment. He had believed he owed her. He discovered instead that he was part of a chain of responsibility extending outward to communities like the one they left behind. In interviews conducted years later for a regional business journal, Michael spoke cautiously about his childhood without naming locations. He described hunger as a teacher that clarifies priorities. Emily continued managing her cafeteria and overseeing weekend food drives, declining invitations for televised appearances. They did not dramatize their reunion. They treated it as a continuation of something that had never required witnesses. The red ribbon, now framed together in a single case, hangs in the administrative office of the foundation they co-created, a reminder that small actions can travel across decades and return with unexpected force. The story began with half a sandwich passed through a fence in a struggling Ohio town. It expanded into boardrooms and classrooms, into balance sheets and lunch trays. And it leaves us with a question that lingers long after the applause fades. If a single act of generosity could shape the direction of one life so profoundly, how many unseen exchanges are shaping the world around us right now? Who was the girl behind the fence? And how does a child's quiet generosity disappear from public record as if it never happened? Why did Emily Carter, the 9-year-old who fed Michael Reynolds for 6 straight months, seem to vanish after her family left Ohio? And what was Michael willing to sacrifice to find her once his name appeared on corporate filings and wealth rankings instead of free lunch lists? These questions followed him long after the factory town faded in his rearview mirror. Public databases showed fragments of the Carter family's movement. A property sale here, a change of address form there, then silence. 22 years. No trace. It would have been easy to assume distance and time had simply done what they often do in America, where millions relocate each decade according to Census Bureau mobility reports. But Michael sensed something else. He wasn't searching for nostalgia. He was searching because records ended too cleanly, too abruptly, as if a chapter had been removed. And what he didn't know was that someone had been hiding the truth. In 1999, two worlds existed on opposite sides of a fence. The town sat just outside Dayton, Ohio, one of many Midwestern communities shaped by steel, auto parts, and long shifts that once promised stability for generations. By the late 1990s, however, manufacturing employment across the Rust Belt had begun to contract, and families who had relied on those wages for decades were adjusting to layoffs that arrived in waves. One side of the fence bordered modest brick homes built during the boom years, lawns trimmed with quiet pride, American flags fixed to porch columns. The other side backed into aging duplexes and rental properties where paint peeled under winter frost and porch lights flickered unrepaired. Property records from the period show rising foreclosure filings in Montgomery County, a reflection of the broader economic tightening. Children from both sides attended the same elementary school, recited the same morning pledges, and played on the same blacktop. Yet when the lunch bell rang, invisible lines reappeared. It was along that fence behind the playground that Emily Carter first noticed Michael Reynolds standing alone. Emily Carter was 9 years old, raised in a home that valued work, restraint, and faith in equal measure. Her father, Daniel Carter, had given 15 years to a local parts manufacturer before being laid off during departmental downsizing. Labor statistics from Ohio during that period show thousands of industrial positions eliminated as automation and restructuring reshaped the workforce. Daniel searched for replacement work, taking temporary warehouse shifts while updating a resume he had not touched in over a decade. Emily's mother, Lisa Carter, balanced a receptionist job at a dental clinic with evening bookkeeping for small businesses trying to remain afloat. Dinner conversations were measured, sometimes quiet, but steady. Bills were discussed openly. Gratitude was expected. Complaints were discouraged. Emily absorbed that discipline. Teachers described her as dependable and thoughtful, the kind of student who stayed behind to stack chairs without being asked. When her mother began noticing that the sandwiches packed each morning seemed to return half-eaten or missing entirely, she assumed her daughter was simply distracted by recess. But the pattern continued. Portions shrank. Apples disappeared. Granola bars never came back home. Emily never explained why. Until one afternoon, when Lisa decided to follow her at a distance after school. Michael Reynolds stood on the opposite side of that fence with a posture that suggested he wished to be invisible. His father had left years earlier, and court records indicate irregular child support payments that placed additional strain on the household. His mother, Angela Reynolds, worked inconsistent shifts as a home health aide while navigating her own struggles, which neighbors would later describe as battles with dependency and exhaustion. School nutrition programs offered free meals to qualifying students, but Michael avoided the lunch line, unwilling to be identified as someone receiving assistance. Pride can be rigid in young boys, especially in communities where self-reliance is treated as currency. He wasn't begging. He was hiding the growl in his stomach, hiding the embarrassment of worn sneakers and unpaid field trip forms. When Emily approached the fence that first afternoon, holding out half a sandwich wrapped carefully in wax paper, Michael hesitated. Accepting meant admitting need. Refusing meant remaining hungry. The exchange lasted seconds, unnoticed by most. But from that day forward, a ritual formed between them, quiet and deliberate. And then she crossed the fence. For 132 school days, Emily Carter crossed that fence after lunch, carrying her neatly packed sandwiches, carefully balanced apples, and the occasional granola bar. She handed him half of everything, and Michael Reynolds accepted it quietly, as if acknowledging a secret contract neither of them fully understood. There were no words at first, only the exchange of glances and the rustle of wax paper as sandwiches were split in two. The rhythm became a ritual, Emily arriving at the same time each afternoon, Michael waiting a few steps beyond the fence, pretending to tie his shoelace or adjust his backpack, then nodding as he accepted her food. Day after day, the pattern repeated, unnoticed by the teachers on duty or the other children laughing across the yard. The act itself was small, yet it carried an unspoken gravity, the weight of survival and trust folded neatly into each sandwich. Each morning, Emily's mother noticed the lunches growing smaller, but Emily never offered an explanation. Then one Thursday in early spring, Michael was gone. Emily waited, watching the playground, glancing at the fence repeatedly as the final bell rang. The next day, still no sign of him. On Monday, the teacher announced that Michael Reynolds had transferred schools. No reason, no ceremony, no chance to say goodbye. The void he left was immediate and profound, though she understood only in part why it mattered. That afternoon, Emily went home and pulled the small red ribbon from her hair. She tore it in half, tying one portion around her wrist and placing the other half in the drawer of her desk. It was a quiet acknowledgement of absence, a way to mark that the connection mattered, even if no one else would see. Before he left town, Michael had found her one last time near the fence. There was an awkwardness between them, the kind that only children carry when the weight of a promise exceeds their comprehension. He whispered, "When I make something of myself, I'll come back for you." Emily laughed softly, unsure how to interpret it, yet her hand trembled slightly as she tied the half ribbon around his wrist, the fabric tight with meaning. He thought he'd see her the following summer, certain that the world would bend to the promise of a 9-year-old's words. He never did. Years passed. Michael Reynolds became a man defined by focus and determination. He built a tech company from the ground up, coding late nights in his small apartment while pitching investors who repeatedly turned him down. By his late 20s, his company had gained traction, eventually attracting a multi-million-dollar acquisition that secured his place on wealth rankings across the country. Yet, for all his professional success, for all the boardroom applause and glossy magazine covers, the question of Emily Carter never left him. He kept the half of the red ribbon she had tied to his wrist all those years ago in a small drawer, hidden behind folders and personal notes, a private reminder that some debts could not be measured in dollars. Several times, he considered setting the search aside, reasoning that childhood promises often fade with age. But the thought of her, the girl who had quietly fed him, haunted him. Success didn't silence the question. So, he hired someone to find her. The private investigator he hired approached the task methodically. Public records were combed, school yearbooks scanned, and neighbors from the old neighborhood interviewed. The first leads offered dead ends. Some claimed the Carter family had moved suddenly. Others whispered that something had happened with Emily's father, though none would elaborate. Rumors swirled, contradictory and tantalizing. Some suggested the family had relocated to another state entirely. Others claimed Emily had vanished into obscurity, deliberately avoiding contact. Each tip added layers to the mystery. Why did no one want to talk about the Carter family? Every conversation, every record, seemed to pull the investigator deeper into a web of small-town secrecy. Each dead end heightened the tension, and every answer raised more questions than it resolved. Finally, a darker lead emerged. Court documents revealed that Daniel Carter had been arrested years earlier in connection with a failed investment that left several local families financially strained. Foreclosure filings confirmed that the family home had been repossessed, and medical records indicated that Lisa Carter had been hospitalized at one point, though details remained private. School records showed that Emily had withdrawn at age 15, dropping off entirely from public listings and leaving little trace behind. Interviews with former neighbors revealed only fragmented memories: a shy, quiet girl, a responsible, almost solemn mother, a father whose temper had worsened after the plant closed. Then, abruptly, the trail ended. Emily Carter's name disappeared from public records entirely. No social media, no professional licenses, no marriage certificates. It was as though she had been erased from the map. And then, her name stopped appearing anywhere. Emily Carter hadn't simply vanished. The truth was far more complicated, hidden behind layers of circumstance and survival. Her father, Daniel Carter, had been arrested for financial fraud shortly after the family left Ohio, a fact documented in county court records and local news clippings. The scandal brought shame that the family could not escape. To protect themselves and start anew, they relocated under a different name, severing the few connections they had maintained in their old neighborhood. Emily, still a teenager, left school early to work, taking odd jobs to help stabilize her family and ensure her younger brother had some sense of security. While Michael Reynolds was navigating the challenges of university, laying the foundation for a technology company, and slowly building an empire from the ground up, Emily was quietly rebuilding her life from ruins, learning resilience in ways that no classroom could teach. Each step she took was cautious, practical, and invisible to the world she had left behind, a life measured in survival rather than recognition. The private investigator finally found Emily Carter years later, living under her new name, Emily Lawson, in a small town in western Pennsylvania. She managed a local diner, a modest establishment that served the community with a personal touch, reflecting the values she had carried from childhood. She was a single mother, never married, quietly raising a child while working long hours to provide stability for the next generation. She had no idea that Michael Reynolds had spent years searching for her, no notion that his wealth, his resources, and his connections had been mobilized to trace a single girl who once shared her lunch with him. And yet, there was something she had kept all these years, something carefully preserved, small and fragile, that bridged the decades and connected their lives in ways neither of them could yet fully understand. Michael Reynolds stepped into the small diner cautiously, almost hesitant, as if the years themselves had built walls between him and the girl he once knew. Emily Carter, now Emily Lawson, looked up from the counter, wiping her hands on a towel, and for a moment, she did not recognize him. The red ribbon, faded but intact, lay in his hand. He placed half of it on the counter, the same ribbon he had carried in his drawer for decades, a silent reminder of a promise neither had forgotten. Emily's eyes lingered on the piece of fabric. Then she disappeared into the back room. The diner was quiet. Plates clinked softly. Minutes passed. When she returned, she held the other half of the ribbon, preserved carefully in a folded envelope. The two halves finally reunited after 22 years. The memory of that small gesture from childhood connected them instantly, bridging years of separation and unanswered questions. She spoke first, her voice soft, but steady. "I never thought you'd come back." Michael placed his hand lightly on the counter, his eyes meeting hers. "I said I would." He replied simply, the weight of decades carried in that one promise. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. They did not need to recount every year, every search, or every disappointment. The connection they had forged in childhood was intact, and now it had returned to them in a way both profound and subtle. Michael, moved by the reunion, offered financial help to expand the program she had created to support her efforts in feeding children and families in need. Emily Carter shook her head, a small, knowing smile forming. "You already paid me back," she said. She showed him what she had accomplished: a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, a free lunch program at the local school, initiatives she had maintained quietly for years. The boy she had fed with a half sandwich and an apple had built a fortune, yes, but the girl who had once saved him in a moment of silent kindness had built a legacy. Her generosity had rippled outward, touching countless lives, proving that the smallest acts of compassion can echo far longer than wealth or recognition ever could. Some promises fade. Some people forget. But sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can echo for decades, shaping lives in ways we could never anticipate. Michael Reynolds kept a promise he made as a child, a promise carried quietly for more than 2 decades. And in doing so, he discovered that repayment is not always financial, and recognition is not always public. Emily Carter, who gave without expectation, had spent years creating her own impact, touching the lives of children she would never meet, sustaining programs that fed the hungry, and providing hope where it was most needed. If you were in his position, would you have kept looking? And if you were in hers, would you have forgiven the silence? Take a moment to reflect on that. Let us know in the comments what you would have done. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe for more real stories that remind us what really matters. And if you think this reunion was powerful, wait until you hear about the man who spent 30 years searching for a witness who saved his life.